Finding random frames in Into the Spider-Verse until it's ugly. This is the first animated film I have done in this series, and as you all know, this film has been meticulously crafted frame by frame to look good, so this is gonna be tough. 1, 2, 3. Yep, it's a good looking frame. The first thing I want you to notice about this frame is an illustration technique called hatching, and hatching is just these diagonal lines right here. And these diagonal lines, which you will see throughout this film, are used to create shading. They are used to basically trick your eye into thinking that there are shadows in these parts of the image. They obviously use this technique to help replicate the illustration style of a comic book, because at its heart this is a comic book movie, and they were pushing the boundaries of animation in this film, and that's why it's one of the best looking films of the past 20 years or so. As far as the lighting goes in this shot, because we are more of a cinematography focused channel, it's actually a pretty simple setup. If you wanted to replicate this in real life, I would have a tungsten light outside of the door here, blasting into a beadboard or some kind of white material and reflecting that light, that orange light, back through the doorway, creating this nice key light on their face. And then the light on this side is motivated from moonlight, because moonlight is typically shown to be blue in movies and TV shows. So you would have a window on this side, and then you would have a very powerful, maybe HMI light coming through that window through a CTB or a blue gel to create a very blue moonlight look. So it's not an ugly shot. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, great close up. Again, we see the hatching in the shadows of this image, but there is also another illustrating technique going on if you zoom in closely. As you can see here, they are using little dots to create shadow, and these dots are called halftone. And again, this halftone technique is used to replicate a printed comic. But it's not just done as an ode to those comics, there is a reason for it, and again, that reason is to create texture and shadow. So both halftone and hatching can create shadows. However, when to use hatching over halftones or halftones over hatching is up for your own personal preference, I guess. I think in the case of this movie, they chose to use hatching in the darker parts of the image and halftone in the lighter parts of the image. As you can see, specifically in this coat down here, on the light side of his coat, they are using the halftone, and on the dark side of his coat, they are using the hatching. So they are using both of these things simultaneously and for different but similar purposes. As far as lighting goes, if you wanted to replicate this in real life, I would take your actor outside and have the sun up in this corner of the frame, basically backlighting him slightly from the side, and then you would want to wrap this light around his face somehow, most likely with the use of a bounce board right around in this area. So the sun would be bouncing off of the bounce board and back onto his face, creating a soft light on this side. And then on this side, to get this color, you would probably need to, again, gel a light with CTB. Not ugly, next shot. But first, if you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking and subscribing and commenting a random comment in the comments below, because that helps the algorithm, and I'm trying to get to 20,000 subs by the end of the year. Here we go, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, great looking shot. We're shooting onto a flat wall, which typically creates a flat shot, but we are creating depth with a super close foreground object in Doc Ock, and then we are creating another plane right here with Spider-Man, and then the background is the final plane that we see. And so we have 3 different planes on varying points in the Z-axis, and that just helps to create depth. Other than that, I think an interesting thing about this film to know is the way that they achieve some of the facial expressions. As you can see, her facial expression is primarily being created by this line on her forehead, this crease on her forehead. And how they achieved this was by creating a 3D model of all the characters. So this is a 3D model. This is not a 2D illustration. It's a 3D model in, I believe, a program called Maya. And then they just drew 2D elements onto the face. So this is probably a 2D element, this is probably a 2D element, and this is a 2D element as well. And that just gave them a lot more control and made it easier on them, and it made the image look more 2D than it actually is. And I think that's pretty genius. So not ugly, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's a really cool shot. Obviously, the lack of color in this shot provides a lot more of an eerie, scary tone for this scene, because the scene's supposed to be eerie and scary. But the main thing that my eye is drawn to in this shot is the way that they are achieving an out of focus look. Because typically, if you are shooting a real film on real cameras and lenses, and you have an object close to the camera and an object far away from the camera, you're not able to focus on both of those at the same time. However, when you are shooting a comic book movie and you are trying to replicate the look of a comic book in comics, there's not that same look to the depth of field or the amount of the image that is in focus. And so what they did to replicate an out of focus look for a comic book is they used misprinting. And misprinting, as you can see on the edges of this claw, it's basically just offsetting part of the image and then adjusting the opacity. So it basically just looks like the claw has been copied and then positioned a little bit to the left, and then the opacity has been faded slightly so that you can see through this edge of the claw. That creates a faux out of focus look, and it's reminiscent of what happens in comic books sometimes when the printer really just kind of makes a mistake and misprints part of the image in a different location than it's supposed to be. Very cool shot though. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, gorgeous shot. First of all, notice the color harmony of the shot and the way that the colors in the background kind of match the characters. His blue is showing up in his background and his red is showing up in his background with a little bit of black. This was intentional in this scene where the particle collider is going crazy. And apparently, if you go through this scene, you will see that the color of the background changes to match the characters that are in front of that background. Let me see if I can find another example really quick. Yeah, great example. Here we see Doc Ock and the background is still that particle background and it is now green. And I think this is just a very interesting, ingenious way of allowing yourself an environment where you can create color harmony. Because if we go back to the image that I was just on, when you have an image like this where you create the image based on only a few colors, you have what is called color harmony, and that it just creates an aesthetically pleasing image in most cases. Another interesting fun fact is the design of the particles is based on comic books as well. Specifically, it's based off something that the illustrator Jack Kirby used to create. And basically, he would just create dots like this to illustrate particles or energy. And that way of illustrating particles and energy has specifically become known as the Kirby crackle. It's not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I mean, this one's okay. This one's pretty interesting because I think the lighting could actually be better in this scene. Usually when you have a diner scene, you're wanting to motivate the light from outside of the window. But here the light is motivated from the fluorescent lights inside of the restaurant. And when you're shooting this way at the characters at the window, motivating the light from this side creates a flat light. There's not much depth in the lighting. It's a very flat light. However, if you would have motivated the light from outside, it would have made the shadow side of the face on this side of their face. And that is what we call upstage lighting. And that's typically what is preferred when you are shooting a shot like this. However, it's not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that is a movie poster shot right there. You could hang that on your wall for sure. The framing here is just immaculate. You have all of these leading lines leading our eye to the focal point of the image. You have this darker building over here that's kind of acting as a frame within a frame, cutting our attention off from this part of the image, again, drawing our attention this way. You also have high contrast between the bright blues of the lights of the building and the dark costume of Spider-Man here, again, separating him from the background. And on top of that, they are also just doing tricks with this image that you wouldn't be able to tell just from this image alone. If you watch this video on how they made Into the Spider-Verse, there's one section that shows what the actual scene looks like in Maya, and it looks really weird. All of the buildings are at different angles and it just does not look realistic as a scene, but when you put it all together in a 2D shot, it looks amazing. All that to say, that's the benefit of 2D animation. It doesn't have to look real, it just has to look good. At least in a comic book movie like this. So definitely not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, this is a good looking shot too. One thing I do think I'm starting to notice about this movie is that the lighting plots are actually quite simple, at least on their face. In order to replicate something like this in real life, you would just need a street lamp or maybe a tungsten lamp, maybe gel it from back here, backlight him, get an edge light on him like this to separate him from the background, and then fill his face in with another light with CTB on it, a gel of blue. I also see a little bit of orange light on his face on this side, so you're probably also going to want to bounce this tungsten light off of a bounce board just to wrap this light around him a little bit and give him a little bit of fill. And again, we have a lot of color harmony in this image. The blue moonlight is matching the blue parts of his suit, and the more orangish red street lamp is matching the red parts of his suit. Not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, this is really cool, and this is one of the things that Into the Spider-Verse does so well. And that is the inclusion of what they call pop frames, and these are obviously, again, just meant to replicate what comic books look like. And they will insert these 2D drawn images into the 3D animation at certain points in the film. And I think these pop frames just serve as an exclamation point of some sort. As you can see in this scene, this pop frame happens right as he jumps directly in front of this train. It doesn't happen right before he jumps in front of the train. It doesn't happen just some random point when he's running. It happens at the climax of the moment. It is an exclamation point. And these images aren't very detailed, but they work in the context of the film because they are only on screen for a couple frames at a time. Definitely not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I actually really like this shot. First of all, I just love this shade of blue. Any shot with that is automatically a great shot to me. But we are also just creating a ton of depth here by having the book super close to the camera. And in real life, you would want to shoot this on a wide lens, as wide as possible. But again, we don't have to make it look realistic, we have to make it look good. And another part of this image that is not super realistic, I think, is the lighting. Because the lighting on her face, the lighting is motivated by the fluorescent lights in the hallway of the school, which are behind her. So obviously, if the lights are behind her, they're not going to be hitting her face, especially this softly. Her face is super well lit here. It's actually a little flat, but she does have some shading on this side of her face. Maybe the way to achieve this in real life would be to have a separate light above her, behind her, blasting at the locker, and then what you would do is that you would coat the locker in white fabric, maybe like a bleached muslin or something, or some kind of a beadboard. You would just tape this white fabric to the locker, shoot the light at the fabric, and then that fabric would be reflecting light back on her face. So maybe that would be a creative way of doing that in real life. I actually kind of want to test that now. Not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's great. Obviously, these dialogue boxes, I'm not sure if there's a specific name for them, but they happen in comics. And again, this movie is trying to look like a comic. You all know that though. So next shot. 1, 2, 3. This is a pretty cool one. Another thing you'll notice in the animation style of this film, if you zoom into the details, specifically in windows of buildings, even the tall skyscraper buildings, is that you will notice the details that you can see through the window of some of these shots is actually very simple. So here, if we just look inside this window, all we are seeing are blocks, just kind of blocks and blobs of color. They don't really resemble much of anything at all, but it works in the context of the film, especially the further away the window is, because you just don't really pay attention to what's going on back here, and you don't really care. You're paying attention to him walking down the street. Also, they're doing kind of the same thing with the reflections in the car. I mean, these aren't really anything. They're just simple shapes, but our minds have psychological closure, and our minds will fill in the gaps. We don't need that much detail to understand what things are supposed to be. And not only did this technique simplify the animation process, which is already a very intensive one that takes a long time. I mean, obviously it takes a long time because the next Spider-Verse movie isn't coming out for 10 more years probably. So that's my advice to them. Just simplify as much as you can. You know, I want to see the movie. I care about the story more than I care about random things in the window. So just simplify it and get it out next year or something. Get it out when it's ready. Anyway, I digress. I don't know what my point was. I'm going to go to the next shot. Let's go towards the beginning. 1, 2, 3. I like this. It's really cool. Another thing I have noticed while going through this film is they tend to use the halftone dots on very bright parts of the image as well. Not just shadows, but they're using it on bright parts of the image as well. And I'm not sure exactly why they do that, but I think it helps to create the texture in the atmosphere, because if you know anything about trying to get light shafts in real life, you know that you need texture, you need some kind of medium in the atmosphere for the light to bounce off of, like smoke or dust. And so I think this just helps to create a sense of that texture in the atmosphere and helps our minds comprehend these light shafts that are blasting past our characters. And if you wanted to achieve something like this in real life, you would want a hard light back here, a very bright hard light shooting forward and then possibly bouncing that light back onto their faces with a piece of white fabric. You would also need to fog up the room, as we have just said. So not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's a cool shot too. Another thing I've noticed that this film does a good job of is creating contrast between the background and the focal point of the image. As you can see here, the background is not just one shade of blue. It is more of a darker shade of blue that gradually transitions to a lighter shade of blue right behind the focal point of the image. And this just helps our subject stand out from the background a little bit more than if they had the same shade of blue throughout the image. So not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Okay, this is a kind of weird looking image. It's kind of bordering on ugly to me, but it makes sense in the context of the film. And the reason it makes sense in the context of the film is because the animators specifically chose not to use motion blur in this film. Obviously, when you are filming with a real camera in real life, your shutter speed determines how blurry your motion is going to look. But for comics, when you're scanning your eyes from one comic panel to the next, there's no motion blur in it, and so they tried to replicate that. And the way they replicated the motion without the motion blur is by having some frames like this, which are a little bit wonky. This frame implies motion in the mallet that Peter Porker is using, and his body shape is very just elongated. It kind of looks like it's the Silver Surfer in the new Fantastic Four movie getting spaghettified into the black hole. It's just elongated and stretched, and it implies movement. But this is not quite an ugly frame. I do think it is bordering on it because, you know, we're looking for an ugly frame, and if you were just looking at this, it would kind of look a little weird, but we're not quite there yet. The next shot, 1, 2, 3. Oh, that one's really cool. Actually, this one does replicate motion blur a little bit better, but it is still a hand-drawn thing. There's not actually motion blur in it. These are drawn lines to replicate the movement of whatever is behind them, and these are also hand-drawn. They are not blurred with some kind of a program. Framing of this shot is really cool, though. I love the framing of this shot because this line back here in the background is just leading our eyes to both of their faces. Both of their faces are on this line in the background, and it's just nice. I don't know what else to say. Next shot, 1, 2, 3. I really like this one. This is pretty stunning, I think, primarily due to the color design of this shot. Again, we have color harmony and color contrast. The reds of the image are contrasting with the blacks of the image, and the reds of his costume and the blacks of his costume are harmonizing with the reds and the blacks of the particle background. We also have an interesting, like, bluish highlight around him. I'm not sure if this is motivated by anything in the scene, but it does have some color harmony with the outline around his eyes. But it also just helps him stand out from the background, and I guess it doesn't really need to be motivated by anything. It looks great. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's kind of a funny one. This is a cool looking shot, but at first glance it is kind of weird because you see two of the tentacle fists in the same image. And again, this is another way they chose to create that motion blur without creating motion blur. So for some frames, they would duplicate fists or legs or the thing that was moving in the image for one frame. And it also looks like they are mimicking motion blur with these scribbles on this fist as well. And what this is called in animation is actually, as a technical term, it's called a smear. And they use plenty of smears in this movie, like this shot of Peter Porker spinning the mallet. They're also doing something fun that they do a lot in this movie and just have the text pop up on screen to mimic the sound that the object is making. I think that's a very cute way of mimicking comic book illustrations as well. It's not ugly. I'm gonna go faster. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's cool. I don't know what's going on, but it looks really nice. I'm sure this is mimicking some kind of weird effect. 1, 2, 3. It's just buildings, not ugly. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, great over the shoulder shot. Love the light streak on the wall down here. Always remember to add interesting texture to your background with lights. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, again, what are they doing? They are putting their subject in front of a highlighted background to distinguish the subject from the background. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, great shot. Don't know what else to say. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, cool. 1, 2, 3. I like that. Again, what are they doing? They're using the halftones in the flashlight part of the image. 1, 2, 3. What? What is going on here? Okay, so this is another smear, but it's a very odd looking smear. So he's jumping up into the ceiling, and then they elongate the texture of his suit. Kind of a weird way. What? This is kind of awkward to land on, actually. I think we found it, guys. I think this is the frame I'm going to say is ugly. Obviously, the composition and everything is fine, but as an isolated frame, if you just looked at this, you'd be like, what the heck? So I'm deeming this frame the ugly frame for today. If you enjoyed this video, please, again, like and subscribe and get me to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I enjoy doing these videos. Let me know. I enjoy doing these videos. Let me know which one you want me to do next in the comments, and I will see you next time.